And I want to start with a question for us all. And the question is, to be well, what do I need to make well? To be well, what do I need to make well? Not just inside myself, but in the world around me. And I'm going to be talking about how it's important that we don't just see well-being as something inside us, but that well-being resides in connections and relationships. If we look at some of the definitions of well-being, and here are just three that I discovered in different dictionaries and online. The state of being comfortable, healthy, or happy. Wellness, quality of life, feeling good. Physical well-being that we've just been hearing about. Being full of energy, all of which are important. But let's now look at the wider context. If I'm feeling comfortable in today's world, I am probably in denial of what is happening all around me and in the ecology. If I'm just focusing on my own well-being, I would explain why I believe we are being delusional. And by focusing on our own well-being, we will not improve our own well-being. For if we want to have a quality of life, we must be in service of creating a thriving life in every system we are part of. Our families, our teams, our organizations, our communities, and really importantly, at this time in human history, in the more than human world of the ecology around us. So I want to suggest that all well-being is relational and systemic. For if all is not well in our wider ecology of the earth, humans cannot flourish. If the bees and the insects aren't flourishing, there is no pollination, there is no well-being in our trees, in our plants, there is no well-being in our food, there's no well-being in humans. If all is not well with the human species, then countries like Serbia, like Ukraine, like the UK cannot flourish. If all is not well within countries, communities within them cannot flourish. If all is not well with communities, organizations and families within those communities will not flourish. And if all is not well with organizations and families, we as individuals will not flourish. And if all is not well with us as individuals, all the systems we are part of will be affected by our non-well-being. We have to see well-being as something that is viral, and that you may well know if you are with people who are thriving and full of energy in life, your own sense of well-being suddenly raises. And if you are with people who are always blaming the world and who are always into self-centeredness, your own well-being contracts. So let's just look at three of my great teachers and why they were so important with changing my way of thinking about well-being. I was, for many years, I worked in mental health, I worked as a psychotherapist, I worked with therapeutic communities. And I'll just blank this for a moment. And in that time, what I discovered is there was some great research about looking at what happened when people were in war situations. And they discovered that we now talk about post-traumatic stress disorder. It used to be called battle fatigue. Before that, it was called shell shock. And they discovered that some army units had very high instances of people becoming traumatized. And others had far less. And they thought this was to do with the amount of stress that army unit was under. But when they researched this, they found that wasn't true. Some army units at the front line under enormous stress didn't have high levels of trauma. And others further back did. And then they discovered that the units that had high levels of trauma soldiers also had high instances of alcoholism, of aggression, of people going absent without leave, the depression. And then they started to realize that we have to think about healthy units, healthy organizations, and unhealthy organizations. And they realized that they put any one of us, Anastasia, myself, Jelena, into an army unit that was unhealthy, it would bring out our own latent unhealthiness. But if they took us and put us into a healthy unit, in a healthy organization, where we were part of attending to the health of the whole, it will bring out our own internal healthiness. And so when I worked in therapeutic communities, yes, we provided therapy for the individuals. Yes, we provided group therapy. But most important was that we were working on the health of the community. When I took over, the first thing I did was I said goodbye to the cook, goodbye to the cleaner, goodbye to the gardener. I said, from now on, we do everything to maintain this community of 36 people ourselves. Every morning, those who were not going out to work, the patients, they worked from 9 o'clock to 11 o'clock in the kitchen group, the garden group, the decorating group. And within 2 months, we had a healthier, cleaner, better fed community. Because by helping the patients attend to how do we make the community well, they got better. And that informed me a lot. And then to go back to my slides, I learned from the great Gregory Bateson. I was fortunate to meet him not long before he died in 1981. And he taught me that we've misunderstood Darwin and evolution. When Darwin talked about the survival of the fittest, he wasn't talking about the strongest or those who had the best diet and went to the gym, but those who co-created well with the changing ecological niche around them. Now we think about how do we make ourselves well? How do we become a successful team, a high-performing team, a successful organization? But the unit of survival Bateson talks about and says that Darwin was talking about is not the individual or the team or the organization, but any of these in dynamic relationship with their environmental niche. Those who destroy their ecological niche destroy themselves. So we need to think about well-being as always lying in connections, not in parts. It's no good just thinking about the health of our liver or the health of our heart or the health of our lungs. We have to think about them in how they relate to each other, and how our mental state relates to our physical, and how our physical and mental state relate to the teams, the families we're within. One of my books, I did a whole study of why do we have so much increase in mental distress around the world, and started to look at that as a cultural phenomena, and started to realize that many of our psychological containers, families, extended families, communities, shared beliefs, rituals, rhythms of the year, have all started to fragment. And we try to build our identity and our well-being within our own encapsulated world. And it doesn't work. So let's look at another of my very influential teachers, James Hillman, also sadly died about 3 or 4 years ago, a Jungian, great Jungian analyst, and did a lot to rethink the whole nature of psychotherapy, and big influence on the coaching that I've taught. He said we need to redefine sanity within an environmental context. It contends that seeking to heal our own individual soul without reference to the ecological system of which we are an integral part is a form of self-destructive blindness. And at the heart, he said, of the coming environmental revolution, there needs to be a change in values, one that derives from a growing appreciation of our total dependence on the wider nature of the more than human world. Without it, there is no hope. In simple terms, we cannot restore our own health, our own sense of well-being, unless we restore the health of the planet we are inextricably dependent upon. And then finally, he said, the airs, the waters, the places play as large a role in the problems psychology faces as do moods, interpersonal relationships, and our memories. We can no longer look at psychotherapy, coaching, attending to what's happening within us. And then finally, third great teacher, Ken Wilber, who said that Gaia's main problem is not pollution, toxic dumping, ozone depletion, or any such. Gaia's main problem is that not enough human beings have developed to the post-conventional, world-centric, global levels of consciousness, wherein they will automatically be moved to care for the global commons. There's currently a worldwide movement called the Inner Development Goals. You can look it up online. Fantastic video. And they're saying, as human beings, we cannot achieve the UN sustainability goals unless we shift the way we learn, we educate, and we develop as human beings. The real challenges are human selfishness, greed, myopia of looking at themselves, trying to make themselves well, rather than make themselves well through making the world around them well. So what does this mean for coaching? I have got more and more radical. I've been involved in coaching since, I think, 1978, very, very early days. And we achieved a lot in that time in terms of helping a greater focus on the relational and emotional intelligence. But now I've often said we need to move from focusing on moving from IQ to EQ and move from IQ to WeQ, to collective and collaborative intelligence, not just in teams, but between teams, between organizations and their stakeholders, between the human and the more than human world. And come back to individual coaching, we have to realize the coachee is not the client, but they're our coaching partner. No longer should we be asking, what do you want from coaching? But rather, we should be moving into partnership with the coachee, shoulder to shoulder, facing what is life requiring them to step up to. We should be on life's agenda. So now in my more radical times, I say, there's no such thing as individual coaching. There is coaching with an individual and through an individual, but not of an individual. Together, shoulder to shoulder, we need to be coaching the connections between the coachee and the people they work with, the groups, the teams they are part of, the organization they are part of, the stakeholder, and the wider ecologies. And when I talk about this, many people say, and I'm sure I will get some questions about this, as coaches, it's not our job to bring the ecology into the coaching room. And I say, what a strange way of thinking. And I said in one conference, when somebody got very cross with me, I said, well, let me ask you a question. Do your coaches eat, drink, breathe? Because if they breathe, eat, and drink, the ecology is already in the room. It's not something out there, it's inside us, it flows through us and out of us. We are part of the ecology, and the ecology is part of us. I said, it's already in the room, it's just we're not paying attention to it. And so how do I start coaching sessions? Very simply, if I was coaching Anastasia, I would say, Anastasia, first of all, tell me the story of your life. From the moment you were born to arriving in this room today in just 2 minutes. Why? Because I want her to tell not the story she's told 100 times before, but something that connects her life and the journey of it, to step back and for us to make that connection. Then I say, Anastasia, please tell me, take me to a moment when your heart was singing. Somewhere in your work and life where you felt most fully alive. Because that way we make heart contact. But then I'll say, Anastasia, tell me, who and what does your life serve? When she tells me about her family, and then she tells me about her colleagues, I say at the coaching center, and I say, who else? Then she tells me about all the people who come to the coaching center. And I say, and who else? And she says, well, their organizations. I say, who else? Well, the customers, the investors, the suppliers of those organizations. And I say, who else? And she says, well, I suppose the communities of Belgrade in which those organizations exist. And I say, and who else? And eventually we get to the ecology. And I say, if we bring all those stakeholders, Anastasia, into the room right now, what would they be saying is the work you and I need to be doing together in coaching? So now we get closer to being on life's agenda. Not my agenda, not her agenda, but what life is asking us to step up to. And then if we go on to teams, some of you know my work on team coaching. And I've written a lot about how we shouldn't look at high-performing teams. Because that, again, is like the individual just looking at their health. The team just looks at their success. And I've seen many teams, by focusing on their success, sub-optimize their bit of the system at the cost of the wider organization. I've seen organizations flourish at the cost of the world around them. So in our looking at high value creating teams, which are teams that co-create beneficial value with and for all their stakeholders, we look at 5 disciplines. Commissioning is about, are we clear about our purpose and who our team is in service of? Who do we create value with and for? Once we're clear there, we can start moving over and start to look at, so what do we need to focus on to fulfill that purpose? The commissioning is about the why, the clarifying is about the what. We know from all the research, the thing that makes most difference to a well-being team is to have a clear purpose that we recognize we cannot achieve together. We can only achieve through collaboration. And that means we need team goals, not just individual KPIs, but team objectives and team KPIs, clear processes. We need to stop focusing on the parts and start focusing on the whole of what we need to do together. And that means we need to shift how we do our meetings. Our meetings need to not just be about reporting in, they need to be about what starting future back. What do we need to step up to in the future? How can we create more beneficial well-being for all our stakeholders? our employees, our investors, our customers, suppliers, the communities where we operate, and our contribution to making the ecology well. All discipline, having done the why, the what, the how, is the who. How do we take that back into our relationships with every one of our stakeholders? And how do we turn our stakeholders into partners? So we go shoulder to shoulder with them, focusing on their stakeholders and our stakeholders, and discovering what we can do together we cannot do apart. So not see all these stakeholders, including the ecology, as demands, but as opportunities, resources. And then finally, right in the middle, at the heart of this, core learning. Can we be, as a team, constantly growing our capacity to be future fit, to be well within, because we're creating value and wellness for all those we are engaged with and dependent upon? So 5 quick ways to increase team well-being. Help them discover their collective purpose. Ask them, who and what does your team serve? What can you uniquely do as a team that no other part of the system can do? What can you uniquely do that the world of tomorrow needs? Enable them to function at more than some of their parts. In my books on team coaching, there are many structures for helping teams be generative and have generative dialogue and create new thinking that was not in anyone's head before they came into the room, to become involved with each other at the heart level, the gut level, as well as the head level. Help them to learn to be responsible for each other's performance, learning, and well-being, not just their own. Then you have the real synergy of the team. Discover who their lives and work serves and how they can increase the beneficial value and well-being they create for all those parties. And finally, very simply, I talk a lot about how BMWs are destructive to teams' well-being. Do you know what BMW stands for? And now I don't mean the car. It stands for blame, moan, and whine. And how do we turn blaming of others or ourselves into turning the problem into a challenge, the challenge located in a connection, not in a person or a part, and see that challenge as a generous lesson that life is offering us. This is how life becomes full of well-being, creating well-being. And just finally to say, my latest book, which I wrote with several amazing people from right around the world, 60 different contributors from many countries and indigenous groupings. And it's written as a 7-day workshop. You can buy the book, you can do it yourself. Each half day is like you're at the workshop. You hear from different speakers around the world like we are today. You're given exercises to go off and do, which will help you shift your way of connecting with others and with the wider ecology. And then you come back and you share. And you can set this up and run your own training. Get a peer group to do it with you. It's an extraordinary experience. And this will help you look at how do you start to see well-being in connections, not in parts.